It's Nigeria's Independence Day today, 65 years of freedom from colonial rule and counting. And in those 65 years, we've explored oil for most part of it. And in this current dispensation, we are more than committed to increasing investment, increasing our recounts, and ensuring that we get our people out of energy poverty using the resources God has so richly endowed us with. Before we continue, let's get a 2-minute video on Invest in Nigeria.
Invest in Nigeria. Nigeria is advancing bold reforms and projects to reassert its role as Africa's leading hydrocarbon hub. The country is targeting crude production of 2.5 million barrels per day by 2026, supported by new partnerships and a regulatory reset under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's landmark executive order. The reform introduces performance-based tax credits tied to cost reductions, creating a transparent, efficiency-driven environment that is unlocking stalled developments and attracting fresh capital. Nigeria is also doubling down on gas, with over 200 trillion cubic feet of reserves, positioning it as a cornerstone of the country's long-term energy strategy. The NLNG Train 7 expansion, set to boost capacity by 35%, underscores the central role of LNG in driving growth and regional exports. At the same time, projects will add 4,000 megawatts of power capacity by 2026, and Petrobras's planned return highlight rising investor confidence. With regulatory clarity and major projects underway, Nigeria is entering a new phase of energy-driven growth.
And leading that new phase is, on behalf of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. Please welcome His Excellency Senator Heineken Lokpobiri, Ph.D., to set the tone for us this morning.
Good morning and happy 65th Independence Day. Thank you very much. I see a lot of members from the National Assembly, who are here, today. So I formally recognize you people. So you're welcome to this session of Invest in Nigeria. I see a lot of captains of industry here, who have deep pockets, who also have capacity to mobilize resources to invest in Nigeria, with a view to addressing the energy security problems in Nigeria. So I welcome all of you. And I recognize all of you, ladies and gentlemen, who are here to be part of this, session, which is tagged Invest in Nigeria. You agree with me that Nigeria has experienced, significant reforms under the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration. No doubt there are opportunities, and the future of Nigeria's oil and gas is the greatest, in Africa. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's actually a privilege to speak with you, today about why you should prefer to invest in Nigeria as opposed to any other destination. Nigeria is Africa's largest, oil producer. Nigeria is also, we have the 9th largest gas reserves in the world. And these figures are some 20 years ago. And it's always contended that, if we do some work now, we could be as endowed as much as, 600 trillion cubic feet. But we'll stick to the figures that have been there, before, which is 209 trillion, cubic, feet. Nigeria is also strategically positioned, on the Atlantic as a natural hub to service the West African sub-region when it comes to, supply, of energy, to satisfy the African needs, to satisfy the African market. Under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's, administration, certain executive orders, which are very bold, have reduced approval time Because part of the complaint we had when we came was that things that have to be done within a short time were taking as long as 2 years. And yesterday, all of you who attended the opening ceremony, we hear from one of the speakers there that, look, one of the secrets is to act fast and win big. And so under this government, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu signed certain executive orders that have taken that into consideration by acting fast, simplifying the approval process. I've signed a couple of, licenses without the people getting to even know who the minister is. That wasn't the norm before. I know a lot of people who have modular refinery, licenses who have come to me. Okay, you signed my modular refinery license without knowing me. I say, I don't need to know you. Nigerians too, Mr. President has hired me to do a job, and I'm very happy doing that job. So things have changed in Nigeria. There are a couple of tax reliefs that, are also contained in the executive orders. If people want to invest in deep water, there are incentives. If you want to invest, in shallow water, there are incentives. If you reduce your cost of production to a given threshold, there are incentives. There are significant incentives that have triggered the level of investment that we're seeing today in Nigeria, courtesy of the Petroleum Industry Act that was passed by the National Assembly a few years ago. You agree with me, Nigeria is now a place where you can bring in your capital and also take it back at will. And that is exemplified by the, major divestments that took place, in Nigeria. Before we came, Shell, ExxonMobil, ENI, NAOC wanted to divest. But those divestments were stalled. And if you don't assure people that they can bring in their capital and then take it back at will, in line with best global practices, it will be very difficult to attract capital. So when this government came, one of the things the government did was to enable those, divestments. NAOC was acquired by Wando, Seplat acquired ExxonMobil, Renaissance acquired Shell, and then Chapal also, acquired Equinor, a stake into some of those assets. Based on that, Shell immediately announced the $5 billion Bonga Knot investment. And that is as a result of bold policies that were, implemented, by this government. And the good news is that following that, there's an additional 200,000 barrels, to a number of barrels in Nigeria. And the assurance we are given to the world now is that if you are investing in Africa and you have not invested in Nigeria, know that you have not started investing in Africa. But there's no place like Nigeria. Nigeria is the most experienced, with over 70 years of experience in oil and gas exploration. We have the experience that we are willing to share, and we have been sharing with our brothers, in Africa. In my office, I pay host to a lot of colleagues who come to me to learn how, we're able to practice local contents. They are coming to tell us how we are able to, do bid rounds seamlessly. And because Africa is a continent so large, with 1.5 billion people, the demand is huge. Nigeria alone can't do it. So we share willingly, at no cost, our experience. But I think very soon we're going to be charging costs so that we can give appropriate value to the advice we give to them. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, within this period, the confidence in the industry is back. NUPRC, briefed me a few weeks ago that they signed, 28 new fields. They will field development plans for 28 new fields. 28 development plans for 8 new fields. What about $18.2 billion? This ultimately is targeted at adding additional 600,000 barrels and 2.1 billion, BCF of gas daily to our own, energy demand. You also know that in Nigeria, we supply the entire West African sub-region. Yesterday, some of you who heard, my Kandaba from Ghana speaking, he alluded to the fact that Nigeria is supplying gas, to Ghana. We're supplying gas to Benin Republic. We're supplying gas to our West African, neighbors. As part of our strategy to produce the gas and then, service, this country. So that all of us, we together, resolve the issue of energy poverty, in Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, you agree with me that this is not rhetorics, in Nigeria. This is hard evidence known to, to the world. And Nigeria is now a space where capital, could be easily attracted. More so at this particular time that even the IEA had changed its position, which was that, look, abandon fossil fuel, so that we can give you in return handouts. All of you were here when we were told that the International Energy Agency itself has said that there will be energy crisis in the world unless we invest $540 billion per annum on oil and gas. That is very good for us because we have been contending that, look, the Paris Agreement had nothing to do with abandoning any sort of energy, but reducing emissions. But somehow, some people decided to distort the Paris Agreement. But I'm very happy that all of us are going back to the content of the Paris Agreement that says that, look, reduce CO2 emissions. And also to tell you, Nigeria, having adopted gas as a transition fuel, we also brought a policy to commercialize any flare gas. And so today, we are nearly, experiencing zero flares in Nigeria. Nigeria may be perhaps the first African country to experience zero flare. And we are supporting, those who want to invest in that space to do, what they need to do. So in summary, let me say that Nigeria is full of opportunities. In the upstream, we have deep water, shallow water, and swamp acreages with vast reserves. In the downstream, we recently launched the West African reference market. Because we believe that Nigeria, because of our geographical location, and because whatever, you import into Nigeria, whatever you refine in Nigeria, essentially services the entire West African sub-region. So recently, NMDPRA, in collaboration, with S&P Global, launched the West African reference market. But we want to see how Nigeria will be, the anchor for refined products to satisfy, the African market. You heard yesterday, and the data is there for all of you, to confirm, that in 2024 alone, Africa imported about $120 billion of hydrocarbon refined products and related services. $120 billion. And our target in Nigeria, at this particular defining moment, is to see how we can, capture part of that money. Even if we take 20% of that, it will be a good starting point. Bearing in mind that if you refine products in Nigeria, if you invest in the midstream, you certainly will have a market that will service not only Nigeria with a consumption of 50 million liters per day, not to talk of the diesel that is consumed, the naphtha, the byproducts that are needed, in Nigeria, but also the entire West African sub-region, up to Central African Republic. And that was why I recall that when we remove subsidy from Nigeria to trigger private sector investment, Nigerians didn't protest as much as our neighbors who protested. How can we remove a subsidy that was bleeding Nigeria? And the protest was in neighboring countries, not in Nigeria. That is evidence of the fact that whatever we were doing was basically subsidizing the entire West African sub-region. The point is that Nigeria is the gateway to the West African market. And by extension, we want Nigeria to be the gateway to the entire, African, market. And I think that this will be the best time for anybody who is thinking about investing in hydrocarbon to invest in Nigeria. So you can take advantage of the opportunities that exist in Nigeria and the West African sub-region. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to bore you anymore, but the summary is that we have enormous opportunities in upstream, in midstream, and in downstream. And now that the world is changing, do not wait till tomorrow. Make your decision now, cut the deals now, and invest in Nigeria for the benefit of Africa. Thank you, and may God bless.